Welcome back to the podcast. I am really excited today to have Jesslyn McCutcheon here, and we're going to be talking about a subject that isn't often talked about. And I'm so appreciative of her willingness to be here with us and talk about how we can do better in supporting mental health and destigmatizing the diagnosis, and especially in the church. Oftentimes, the church, they mean well, they're trying to be there for people, but they just don't know what they don't know and how they could maybe come alongside someone who is in this place and do a better job. So this isn't meant to be a judgment. This is meant to be an opportunity to educate, to hear from someone who has walked this journey. So not only does Jesslyn have lived experience, but she is trained, she is a speaker, she's an advocate, she works on the hotlines. So she's coming to us as a subject matter expert in this. And I am just so thankful for you coming here, spending time with me, and allowing us to learn how we can do a better job supporting people struggling with a mental illness diagnosis. So thank you for being here and having this really important conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what I'd like to do is if you could just take a little bit of time and kind of walk us through your story. You know, it's your story to tell, and it's all about sharing your journey and how that is now helping you to be a more effective advocate and leader in this space. And so I'll just leave it to you. You can start out and we'll just chat along the way about how, we can do a better job of supporting people in this space.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan. My journey began when I was 23 years old. I started noticing that when I got up in the morning, it was taking a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And I didn't really know what was going on. I kept pressing on and doing my everyday things, going to work. But I would come home and I would find myself just dropping my things down and going straight to bed, just being completely wiped out. That pattern continued, and I continued to try to push through and do my job, but I would come home and the same thing would happen over and over again. It led to the point where I was finally asked by my boss to come into his office because it got to the point that I started going into work wearing the same outfit as before because it took too much energy to even get ready. It got to the point where it was hard to even splash water on my face in the morning. It felt like I was wearing shackles around my ankles, trying to go anywhere. It was like I was dragging a ball and chain around, just lifting a toothbrush to brush my teeth. It was like taking everything out of me. So that day that I went into work, I basically went in there and I felt like all eyes were on me because my hair was hardly brushed. I had no makeup on. This is one of those kind of jobs where you would go and normally you would dress business casual, and I was dressed obviously, but it wasn't the same outfit as before. And I just did not look good. I didn't look well at all. That was the day my boss called me into his office, and he very compassionately and empathetically asked me to sit down and, just told me he could see that I hadn't been doing well for a while, and he could see the decline in my appearance and my work, and that he just wanted me to take some time off and to get the help that I needed. And after he said that, it was a very hard thing to hear. I really didn't know how to respond because I just really didn't know what was happening to me. I'd never experienced anything like this before. So after I left work that day and went back to my apartment, basically after that, things just continued to get worse and worse and worse to the point that I didn't get out of bed anymore. And it was like, I didn't want any kind of light coming in my room. I wanted to be in complete darkness. I've been a Christian for a very long time, but in this space, you're crying out to God, you're asking him why, but it's like you hear nothing. All you hear is silence. and you're in such a tremendous amount of pain. You don't know what's going on. You feel like Satan is just hitting you with these arrows like over and over and over again, and you just feel all alone and lost, you know? It was like that for about 3 weeks after I had, basically lost my job. And my roommate at the time would come in and lay with me in the evenings because she saw me withering away and the weight that just kept on coming off. And she became scared. She became really afraid to leave me alone. So she would come in at nights and she would just be like, can I just lay beside you? And of course I would let her lay beside me, but I basically was not getting out of my bed at all. I wasn't eating. I would get up, pull myself to get up and like go to the restroom if I have to do that. But her and my parents worked behind the scenes, and my parents came to get me. And I don't really remember much from that day. That's what a funk I was in. It almost got to like a catatonic depression state. And my parents brought me back home, and I wasn't home probably but for a week and a half, and I attempted suicide. I saw no way out of the pit that I was in. I dwindled that far down. I was that down into the ground. So that led to my first hospitalization stay. And I was initially diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and severe depression, MDD, major depression disorder. The OCD consisted of me obsessively picking at my skin. And I did that for hours upon hours. And it would turn into such an obsession that I was actually making little marks and really hurting myself in the process doing it. But something in my head was like, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. And I would keep going until I literally was physically exhausted and couldn't check like one more pore. And, we have like over 50,000 pores on our face, it would take hours and hours. It's like all I would do would be in the bed or pick at myself. But anyway, after that first hospitalization stay and diagnosis, I came back home. And the next 3 years were the most difficult years of mine and my family's life. It was nothing but in and out of hospitals, meeting with different doctors, trying different medications. That in itself is a process. Sometimes, depending on what medication they're trying you on, the medication is just as strong or feels as strong as the illness itself, trying to get used to the side effects that are pretty extreme with mood stabilizer medicines. I had still not been diagnosed yet with bipolar disorder, but over those 3 years, the times that I would be able to get up and get out, I started to notice my behavior was very erratic and very impulsive, and I would just take off and go places, drive in my car, and sometimes wind up in another state, not even really realizing what I was doing. I would do very impulsive things. One day I got up, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I had really long hair at the time, and I grabbed a pair of scissors and I just started cutting, and I cut it all off. And that day that happened, again, the suicidal ideation started happening, but I wanted to see my mom. I knew I wanted to see my mom. So I got in my car, and how God makes things happen. I was driving on the road one way, and I had passed her as she was driving on another way. And I had called her and I asked her if she could please pull over. She pulled over, and we met in the CVS parking lot. And the look that she looked at me, she was trying not to say anything by the drastic hairdo I now had, and how I looked and what my eyes looked like. And, she always told me that there was a certain look I got in my eyes when it was to that point, when she knew that I was desperately, desperately needing help and I wasn't doing well. So that led to another hospitalization. we continued things, we continued trying medications, and it just wasn't lifting the depression. And I went into a catatonic state depression to the point where they decided that they were going to try to do ECT treatments, which are electric convulsive therapy treatments. And it's where they briefly give your brain a seizure after you're put under with anesthesia. And, it's done by a psychologist, and you have a team of people in there with you while you're under, and they do this treatment. But when you wake up from this treatment, you're going to have side effects. And one of the main side effects I had is I had no idea where I was when I woke up. It took me some time to get some of my memory back and those gaps in my memory back, And to this day, I can remember things, but I can't remember all things. I do have memory gaps in my memory. And I know it's from having those treatments, but at the same time, those treatments also did lift me out of the depression and get me back on my feet again. It was at the age of 26, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. So bipolar 1 is a mood disorder. And with bipolar 1, you can have psychotic features. Unlike bipolar 2, people who are diagnosed with bipolar 2, it is just as serious, but they don't experience the psychotic features, such as having hallucinations or delusions. Mm. So after being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it just took years of my life to really get myself on track, find the correct medication for me. It really took a decade of my life before that even happened. And during that time, you wonder if you're ever going to get married. I wondered if I would ever have a family, if I would ever have children. And it did happen. It did happen. I did find the medication that started working for me. I did get married. I have my husband, Jason. We've now been married for over 14 years, and we have 3 beautiful girls. Our oldest is 17, our middle child is 14, and our youngest is 11. So God is good. God is very good. And this led me to doing what I'm doing today. I know what I had gone through for so many years, and I know what I had to overcome. And I just, when I started getting involved with NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, I knew right then and there that this was giving me the empowerment that I needed to reach out and help other people. And that was also a big missing piece that I was missing even years down the road. I kept so much to myself for so many years. I didn't seek community like you really need to. You don't need to try to handle living with a serious mental illness all on your own. I mean, by doing that, you're living in silence, and that is just crushing your soul one piece at a time and taking your soul away one piece at a time. I can't stress more enough that how important community is. When I started getting involved with other people and volunteering with mental health, it gave me that purpose. It gave me that sense of, I'm actually helping people with my story. And that really set in for me when I sat and worked on the national helpline for 6 months. These people would call in and they would be where I was 10 years ago, and many times we would sit there and cry with one another, and, I knew this was a God thing, and I knew this is where he wanted me to be at that time. But those 6 months helped me so much and made me realize that much more after this, that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, whatever way God wanted me to do it. So since then, I'm still involved with NAMI. I work with their NAMI FaithNet, and I work with our local affiliate here. So I've been doing that for the past 3 years. Recently, I also started working with the AACC, American Association of Christian Counseling, and I became a mental health coach, and I love it. That training is awesome. If anybody is ever
I'm
interested
in
in it.
it right now.
You are?
I
Oh my
I
gosh.
I have to like I'm almost through it as well. I It's taken me a little bit of time, but it's an amazing program, and really what I love about it is how they're trying to equip more people, because this is such a significant issue. And one of the things that really stood out to me in one of the sessions that I was listening to is that, so I'm a nurse and I understand, like in medicine, you have doctors and then you have nurse practitioners and PAs as physician extenders, because we don't have enough doctors to be able to do all of the things. And this training is like having these extenders, because we all know how long the waits are to get into counselors, psychologists, and oftentimes it's really about having someone there alongside you. And
Yes.
I really think whether it is in mental illness or domestic violence, anything that we are going through that's hard, we can't do it alone, because that's what the enemy wants you to believe, is that you just need to like stay in that darkness, stay in that room, keep the shades closed, don't let anybody in, because they're going to judge you, they're going to not understand. And there will be some of those people, but that's what we're talking about today, and how we can just have a greater level of awareness. And that mental health coaching certificate through that program is just such an amazing level of awareness in this space of how do you show up? When do you know like how to refer someone to these other resources and experts? And so I'd love, one of the things when we initially talked was that there were some hard things within the church as you were going through that. And I would love, again, this is not a judgment on the church. This is, let's be real, because we cannot heal what's not revealed. We can't change something that we're not aware of. And so by having this conversation and allowing people to make an assessment of their own life and how they're showing up in these spaces, or we just don't know. And so people want to do better, but you've got to know better to do better. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, so that people can kind of think about, how are we showing up in our church in this space, and how might we do something different?
Absolutely. I've grown up in church all my life, and even during this process, I wasn't in church much, but my parents would continue to go. But there came a point, not only for myself and my family, because this was such a family type secret, we didn't know how to have these discussions. We didn't know how to talk about this with anybody. We would ask people to pray for us, but we weren't specific on what we were asking about. But people every week would ask my parents, well, how's Jesslyn feeling this week? And when you get that over and over again, that continues for a year, even more, it got to the part for my parents that they couldn't take it anymore. They couldn't take saying back, nothing has changed, and they didn't even know how to express what was going on inside of them, and handling it from a caregiver side.
Such a good point to think about, because we offer help or we're trying to check in, but sometimes that's not helpful, because
Right.
they need you to sit with them, or how to ask better questions in order to kind of allow people to open up and to feel safe and comfortable. Because if you're just asking a very surface level question, this isn't a surface level issue, right? So that just feels in some ways avoidant or dismissive. It's like, oh, how are things? That can definitely be discouraging. I can see that, where you're just like, oh, I can't even unburden myself in this situation, because the question is so generic that if I just start spilling how things really are, they're going to run the other way.
Absolutely. It was last March, and we have a ladies' prayer group at our church. And the lady who runs it asked me if I'd be interested in coming and giving my testimony. Okay. I was diagnosed, more than 20 years ago. And this was the first time I was opening up and basically, quote, like coming out of the closet for mental health, in front of all these ladies, telling them what I had been facing for all these years, what my family had gone through, and I just laid it out on the floor. And after that testimony that night, I saw the conversations that started to take place. I saw the conversations that started to open up within the room. And that's all it takes. That's the most important thing, is for people to talk about it. People don't want to feel like not safe at their church and they're not able to open up and speak freely about it. We go to church on Wednesday nights and we have prayer requests, and over you hear people ask for prayer requests for people of a physical illness. It's hardly never, are the percentages very small, that you hear somebody say, please pray for my daughter who has bipolar disorder, or please pray for my son who has schizophrenia, who lives with schizophrenia. It's just even saying that word. Once you say that word, sometimes you feel like the judgment, it's just how you feel. It's because the conversation is not normalized. And until we stand up and we continue to speak about it, it will never be normalized. That's why it's so important to keep that conversation going. That is now my mission, to go into churches and to tell them about my story and what my family and I faced and what churches can do, And you said something about this. One of the first things a church can do is just be there for that person, meet them exactly where they are, not try to fix them, because nobody can fix that person but themselves. I had to come to that conclusion, and everybody has a different journey. It's going to take time for everybody to figure that out, and it's different for everyone. But for them to meet them where they are, for them to bring them meals, like we bring meals for people who come home from the hospital with a physical illness, if they have opened up about that, of course. People who are experiencing severe depression cannot get out of bed. They cannot barely get themselves in the shower. Having a meal brought to them during that time would do so much, maybe for the family, if he or she could not get out of bed, but it would help the family so much, because during that time, my husband, God just designed that man for me. He is very patient. He has seen me at my worst. He has seen me at my best, but he has always picked up the pieces every time I had gone down, and he kept our family going. And having that support, I know I'm blessed, and I know I'm so fortunate. I know a lot of people don't. And it gets me so emotional, because I know that, I barely got through it with the support I had, and I just don't see how some people are able to do it without the support, and a lot of them don't. That's why it's so important from a church, to be there for their people in the congregation who are hurting. Living with a mental illness is, body, mind, spiritual, all three go together. And the church just needs to recognize that this needs to be treated like physical health. I know we still have a long way to go, but if we can start having these conversations, I can see these doors opening more and more. And, since 20 years ago, we have come so far. We didn't have a 988 number to call back then. I didn't know what NAMI was back then. I didn't know what being a part of a support group was back then. I did a lot of one-on-one therapy, but honestly, being in a support group it helps me more, or it has helped me more, being among other people and families who get exactly, or who can understand what you're going through, and just having them to be there for one another. Another thing churches really could embrace is having a message series on mental health. You could do a whole message series on mental health. You know, it's talking about it from all levels, from the top of the leadership to, the people in the church. So I don't know. With your church now, do they talk about mental health? Do they support mental health?
So I would say there's less an awareness that I'm seeing on mental health, but there
Mm-hmm.
is a more of awareness on domestic violence. So my
Mm-hmm.
story was domestic violence, and I do see in the church that I'm in now, there is a lot more awareness around that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see the same level of discussion or support groups. I don't see, there's arms within, abuse recovery, ministries and things like that. And I don't see that same level of recognition. And honestly, domestic violence comes out of a mental health issue.
Yeah.
As someone who was in it, there were a lot of things within my own mental health and childhood trauma that had resulted in the choices that I made. So it's a root cause, getting and having those conversations would be really powerful. And it's actually one of the women that I'm very close to. She's actually a coach on my collective, and she talks about her struggle with suicide ideation and some things that happened after a traumatic brain injury. And we're actually starting a program to go into churches and discuss crisis intervention and how can we do this well, because I don't think it's a lack of wanting to help people, because I do believe most people have that desire, but when they don't understand it and they don't know how to interact with it, it becomes very awkward and then can be perceived as judgment or shame. And it's really just an awkward, I don't know what to do. And so our goal is to be able to go into different churches and ministries and share our own stories,
Mm-hmm.
because the church that I was at when I was going through my domestic violence, they didn't know how to handle it. And
Mm-hmm.
there was some unhelpful and unhealthy advice that was given and caused more damage. And then at the point when I had to make the choice to leave the marriage, I had spent all of these years serving in the church, and it was all of a sudden like no one knew me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, really hard to be going through something that was unbelievably hard for me emotionally, to kind of admit that this was the reality of my life that I had tried very, very hard to conceal and hide and pretend like everything was okay. My children were suffering, and the people who I thought would have been there by my side, not even having to choose sides, because my ex-husband, he had a lot of things in his childhood and trauma and things. And so people who are acting out in these domestic violence scenarios, they're broken and hurt people too.
Mm-hmm.
And, being able to recognize like we just needed someone to come alongside of us, and maybe at the point that they actually didn't have the knowledge or the ability to know how to then get resources and refer on to people who were more well equipped and had a better understanding of the complexities of the mental health and the things that were happening. I believe it was just a lack of knowledge. And then they're like, well, we don't know what to do with you now. Like, and so that was really hard. But I do believe, just like you, being able to share those stories and kind of help them see what that choice or how they approached it impacted the other person in a loving, non-judgmental space will bring healing to them. It brings healing to me to be part of that. And so I just am so thankful for you really taking this to a whole new level and using your voice and sharing your story. It is scary. Vulnerability is so scary. It is not something that we really welcome in this world because we're just not equipped to handle vulnerability, because we really don't do a good job from a young age teaching skills. That's the other thing I'm very passionate about is speaking on skills that you can develop in your life so that you can tolerate distress.
Yes.
Because when we cannot, when we're sitting with someone who's in a dysregulated state, which happens when mental illness is involved, it is easy for those feelings and experiences and emotions to be transferred. But just like those feelings, we could take them on, we could also choose to show up and be regulated and help co-regulate someone that we're sitting in that space with. But if you don't have the skills to do that, then you start feeling dysregulated, and that only makes the matters, worse. And so we're right now in the process of building our training. We have started something called Crisis Intervention Coalition, and it's really about just going in and equipping and sharing this same message and the opportunity to do mental health coaching certifications. Even if it's not something that you see yourself doing, it's really important to have that information so that you can show up as a pastor or a women's leader and be more equipped for these types of conversations. And the more people who can have this knowledge, it's going to change things. It's going to allow the church to show up in the way that Jesus would show up for them in the flesh, and not just having to try to, yes, we want to call out to the Holy Spirit and ask for his presence. But when you're in those really hard and dark places, it's very hard to connect, even just with someone next to you, much less a spiritual being. And so we have that opportunity to show up and be the hands and feet of Jesus for those people.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times when you're in that deep of a pit, I mean, you're absolutely right. When you're in that much pain, it is so hard to see beyond that pain, and I couldn't for many times, and I knew like 5 years ago that God was nudging me in this direction just with everything going on. But I kept thinking to myself, I don't know if I can do this. This is going to take tremendous amount of boldness, tremendous amount of courage. And, I couldn't do it unless I knew God like I know God. I had to know God in order to know myself and to know what he's equipping me with. And that's the only reason why I'm able to do what I do now. I know he's the one who ultimately got me through it. I know he's the one who ultimately placed those angels in my life that I had no idea were there over all those years. All those people praying for me when I couldn't pray for myself. Never underestimate the power of prayer. Never underestimate things you can't see. You just have to, we have to live by faith and not live by fear. And living with this can cause a tremendous amount of shame. It did for me until I got to that boldness that, I don't really care what people are going to say, as long as Jesus loves me and he loves me and, he has a purpose for my life, I'm going to be okay. And now I've gotten to the point where I am okay. I've become fearless in talking about living with bipolar disorder, just because it's my passion of wanting to help as many people as I can, especially women too, who live with bipolar disorder. I feel that I am able to connect with those women because we've gone through similar things. So I just feel it's a joy when people come to me to share with me. It's just such a privilege. Yeah, I just am so thankful for where I am in my life right now. I never thought I would get to the point where I would live this much of a fulfilled life, but I do. And with God, anything is impossible. You just have to keep your eyes fixed on him, and you have to keep going to him, and you have to keep having a relationship with him, a constant relationship with him. And that's what I lagged a lot, not having that constant relationship with him. It's almost kind of like my relationship went with the moods that I was having a lot of times, and I would push God to the side, but he's the only one. With everything else I have to do to be able to take care of myself living with bipolar disorder, he's the only one who could pull me from that. He's the only one who pulls me from that valley to reach that mountaintop again, And in knowing that, and in knowing that I have his kingdom, the kingdom of Jesus on my side, I just know I'm going to be okay. And I just want that for others. I want that so badly for others. There's so many people hurting. There's so many people hurting. They say 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 24. And mental health affects everyone. Nearly 60 million Americans are affected by mental illness every year. And often the church is often the first point of contact. That is why it's so important, like you said, to have the churches equipped with the resources they need to be able to hand them off to a mental health professional if that's needed, or have the basic foundation and knowledge of, seeing that this could possibly be a mental health issue, to be able to have those resources for them, and to be able to have people trained in their church to be there for those people. So I hope one day, I hope one day, taking that training with AACC too, I just love how they are just planning these ministries within churches for mental health. And it's just the most beautiful thing. And I hope that for our church one day as well. I hope that for all churches. And I just hope for anybody who's listening to this, if they are in the deepest darkness and despair right now, just know that giving up is never an answer. God doesn't want to see you suffering. God doesn't want to see us hurting in that type of pain. And sometimes it is so, so hard. And you don't know how or when, if you're going to make it to the next day. But please, please, please don't ever lose hope. There are millions of people who live with mental illness, who live with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, OCD, the list goes on, and they are able to do it after finding in what they need to be able to take care of themselves with successfully. And for me, it's also on the other side, having the armor of God behind me. Those things have to intertwine. I can't do one without the other, they all go together. And another thing, I guess, too, I stress too when talking to churches, because sometimes you use the word medication, and that is, I don't know, it's a fine line. I don't think some people understand that sometimes having to take medication for a mental health disorder is okay. I mean, maybe it's not a life sentence, but if it's going to get you to the point to help you get back on your feet again for where you are right now, that is okay. You're not going to maybe have to take it for the rest of your life. I hope you don't. With my situation, living with bipolar disorder, I do have to take it for the rest of my life. I'm a part of that 20% of people, that is the case for. Even and with my case too, a lot of genetics play in mine. So I did have a lot of genetics play also in my diagnosis for bipolar disorder. But, I have to take medicine every day. I have to know how
Well,
to
if
take
you
care of
were a type
myself.
1 diabetic and your pancreas was not working, you would take medication every day. And I do
Absolutely.
think that there is a lot of thought maybe where people might suggest that, well, the devil's attacking you, or this is spiritual warfare, or those things are not helpful. Those things are very
No.
hurtful.
Yeah.
You don't understand what you're talking about. Like, it's not about, yes, is there spiritual warfare? Is there demon possession? Yes, those things happen. They're
Mm-hmm.
probably less rare than we give credit for, but yes, do they happen? But that is not where we need to go as lay people. These
Mm-hmm.
are conversations that have to happen with professionals who understand these conditions, and we're there to be a support and really, how can we help? How can we come alongside of you? What are your
Mm-hmm.
needs? And then being that place where they can be themselves and openly discuss what they're facing and going through, but then leaving the medical up to, if you were seeing someone for your diabetes, it would be your endocrinologist who would be telling you what was going on. And I think that I'm so glad that you did bring that up, because it is something that I do think has been conversations that have happened within the church
Mm-hmm.
that leave people feeling like they can't do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for bringing that up. If a church or someone, wanted to have you come out and speak, I'd love for you to tell us, how can they connect with you? What's your website? Are you on social media, that kind of thing? I will put things in the show notes so that people can connect with you. But I think you're such a valuable asset to be part of this discussion, because you have the experience, the life experience, along with the training that you've had, really allows you to stand in that gap of being able to advocate for people experiencing this, because they can't advocate when they're in the midst of it for themselves.
No.
I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't advocate. I didn't know what I needed, but now I get to share that same knowledge from my story. And so how can they connect with you? And I'm just so thankful for you being here with us today.
Thank you so much. The best way probably to connect with me is through my website, and it's www.jesslyn, Jesslyn, McCutcheon, McCutcheon.com. There's a contact page on there. You can connect with me. All my socials are listed on there. Most importantly, though, on my website, there is a resource section. It has resource after resource listed that you may not be aware of, for grief, for suicidal ideation, for NAMI, finding your local affiliate. Check out the resource page if this is something you as an individual or a family member is going through. And if you are interested in, speaking with me, you can just go to the contact page and, fill out the contact form to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, if you've listened to this today and it has impacted you, we would ask that you would like, share, and subscribe, because our goal in sharing our stories is to bring hope to people in darkness. And Jesslyn mentioned this, but if you are in crisis right now, help is available. Don't feel ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out, because there is someone on the other end of that line, like Jesslyn, who is there to really walk with you in that really dark place. And you can reach that at the crisis hotline, which is 988 lifeline.org. You can chat 988 and you can get help. So don't wait, because waiting only extends your suffering. We want to see you living the life of joy and fulfillment that Jesslyn and I now get to experience because of the healing that God has done in our lives. Thanks for listening. We look forward to having you back next time.